right. Looks like we are live. This is study chapter 11, and we are starting now on page 104. Just a brief intro again for anybody who may be popping on. We're doing a slow but sure and steady read through of the book Inner Space by Aryeh Kaplan, and just discussing it and going over certain things as they strike us. And the whole idea behind this is that this kind of discussion, this kind of book, and these kind of topics are really great to discuss in groups rather than just on one's own. And so we've found a lot of value in being able to bounce ideas off of one another. So we are just going to go through and start reading from page 104 and pause at different sections if we have thoughts. And we'll see where it goes. So yeah, welcome to the group. All right, page 104, Creation and Providence. This is chapter 11. It says, we know that God wanted to bestow the ultimate good on man. He therefore created the world in such a way that everything would lead to man. First, he created the will to create. Essentially, this will was a complete partsuf containing everything necessary to create man. Man needed free will, abstract intelligence, the ability to make logical inferences, the capacity to communicate, to create, love, give, and receive. All of these would be contained in potential, in this will. This is the level of Atik Yomin and Arich Anpin, Keter. Next, God created Chokhmah, Abba, and Bina, Ima. These are the masculine and feminine forces of creation. On the level of Arich Anpin, the feminine counterpart is subsumed within the male aspect and is not mentioned as a separate partsuf. In Abba and Ima, we have the female emerging as a separate entity. Still, the Zohar refers to Abba and Ima as two intimate friends who never part. They may be two separate partsufim, but they never manifest in exclusion to each other. The final stage of this development is Zeir Anpin and Nukva. It is here that, for the first time, the possibility of separation exists. Zeir Anpin and Nukva can attain the highest level of zivug, attachment, but this is only possible through mankind's actions. Eric, I just saw you popped on. We are on page 104, sir, and I just got through the second paragraph.
Okay.
And the context is we're talking, just starting to get into and Nukva.
Which paragraph are you on, sir?
The third paragraph, whereas Abba and Ima.
Okay.
And we're talking about Zeir Anpin and Nukva, moving on from Atik Yomin and Arich Anpin. So I'll read the last. I'm going to read the last paragraph again, just because. So it says, next, God created Chokhmah, Abba, and Bina, Ima. These are the masculine and feminine forces of creation. On the level of Arich Anpin, the feminine counterpart is subsumed within the male aspect and is not mentioned as a separate partsuf. In Abba and Ima, we have the female emerging as a separate entity. Still, the Zohar refers to Abba and Ima as two intimate friends who never part. They may be two separate partsufim, but they never manifest in exclusion to each other. The final stage of this development is Zeir Anpin and Nukva. It is here that, for the first time, the possibility of separation exists. Zeir Anpin and Nukva can attain the highest level of zivug, attachment, but this is only possible through mankind's actions. It's interesting that we all of the book kind of is dancing around this issue, and we're just kind of like re-examining it from different angles. But the idea that someone that separating, if you will, a separation can lead to an even more intimate and even more significant relationship than if one had remained attached all the time completely. That's just standing out to me tonight when we're reading through this, and that you see this paralleled in Adam and Eve, especially in the Midrash, where they're it's talked about how Adam and Eve were actually stuck, if you will, back to back. Like Eve was in Adam, but she was like, attached to him in a very significant way, and they were really just one person. And then there was this separation that happened, and that separation allowed them to turn and look at each other face to face. Before they were back to back, but now they were able to approach each other face to face. So that separation, although painful and uncomfortable, allowed for a level of relationship to happen in a way that was much more significant in a way, because it allowed, anyways. And so we see that with Adam and Eve. We see that in the idea of us, as souls, right, ourselves being separated from the Father. Hashem's Ein Sof is the infinite light, right? Everything is Ein Od Milvado, everything is God. So everything has been separated, if you will, from Him. And we, are a piece of that. But that separation is unto a purpose, and that purpose is, the greatest good possible that can be bestowed on us. And that greatest good is by us, having been separated, being able to return and face, Hashem face to face as, best as we, is at least as possible. That allows for a certain type of relationship and a connection with Him that is well beyond anything we could have experienced if we had remained, if you will, in Olam Haba. Anyways, you just see this pattern kind of play out. So, anyways, any thoughts? I can keep reading.
No, it's a really, really important thought that you're pointing to, and it's one that when I first read through this book many moons ago, I didn't really quite grasp and understand. Like you said, there's this idea of the convergence of these two opposing forces. In computer, like thinking of like the 0 and the 1. The on or the off, the expansive and the constrictive, and the idea at this really high level, there's no distinction. They're an absolute symmetry to each other. The perfect balance of matching and opposing forces, and that's, like you said, like referring to the state of Adam and Eve before they were created as distinct and separate. And it's interesting that the idea of hashgacha, of divine providence, comes from this separation, meaning that now they can face to face, that there's a possibility of otherness, not from each other, but there's a separation between the two that allows for another force to come into that relationship. And obviously you see that possibility being created by the temptation of the serpent in the garden. And so in this idea of the Abba and the Ima, the perfect emanation of that construct through God, there's no room for evil. There's really no room for any set of separation or otherness, and then see when these two work in perfect. If you have a system that's perfectly symmetrical, that means there's no opening for any otherness or any kind of it's a closed system. There's no input, there's no output to that system. So there had to be and you realize, as you talked about before, the fact is that kind of system can't function in this world without being ultimately destroyed. So there's this pseudo otherness that's created from this perfect confluence of relationship between the two. This closed system now creates a sense of otherness in the form of da'at, this knowledge, and that's manifested through this idea of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life being manifested in the midst of the garden, the presence of God being manifested in the garden. And so it's supposed to keep, if things had been at this very high level, then the only amount, like this perfect balance of otherness, this separateness, the minimal amount necessary to create a relationship and an ability to not only transmit, but to receive this perfect system. But we know that they allowed for separation to be when Eve listens to the serpent, that it causes this further distinctiveness. And that's where this idea of this Chanhaga, so in the system of the RE that he alludes to a lot, this idea of Chanhaga, like a reality of the realities that are created when the system is further given distinction. And I can't, the word I'm looking, it's almost like things become more corporeal, more removed from absolute unity and oneness, down to a sense of separation and distinction. Then this construct of divine providence becomes a reality. Now there's a third possibility. It's not just Abba and Ima. There's another possibility that doesn't just like the kind of like the vision that Ezekiel has. It's not the image of a man. It's the image of an image of a man. It's like the possibility of a separation exists. It's not a real separation, but it's a possibility of a separation. So it's more than a potential, and it's less than the actual. It's this in between state. But when this distinction is made, when they allow this evil entity to come and cause further division and separation, then you have this construct of divine providence, this third potential hanhaga, this reality that's created. You have on and off. You have Abba and Ima, or Chesed and Gevurah, or good and evil. And the third possibility that becomes a reality and now a manifesting force in the world is this idea of Rachamim, or mercy. It's a balance between the two. And so at that perfect level of the mind of God, where it's this Keter, this crown, the will manifested into the Father and balanced by the Mother into this closed system, now it goes down to the next level, into manifesting into a different system. And that's where you get this construct of mercy, this balance between the two, which becomes its own reality. And it's that balancing between the restrictive and expansive forces that creates the reality of divine providence in this system. And this, you listen to the Rabbi Kessin a lot. He uses this idea of the Hanhaga of this and the Hanhagos of this, is this idea of the mercy, this triad of Chesed, Gevurah, and Rachamim, the loving kindness, the judgment or din, and mercy. So now it just becomes, instead of this perfect unity, it just becomes all of these various buffers. And those, instead of creating this perfect symmetrical balanced relationship, now these other the children are born, like these other possibilities come out of these systems to create different realities that weren't necessarily there at the beginning. But like any relationship where there's Abba and Ima, there's a potential for children, and so they birth other realities, other possibilities in the system that weren't necessarily there. They were potentially there. And that is this whole system of divine providence, which kind of runs interference for us. And that's something that I really didn't get when I first studied this book before.
Yeah, in that separation, it's almost like it allows us to kind of experience a little bit of the role of the Abba and Ima, aspect, which, even though we descended, now we're able to, in that descent, we're able to kind of experience something and ascend, and have a ability to relate in a level that we couldn't have prior to.
Yeah, because in that sense, in that perfectly symmetrical system, and this is something I heard from Rabbi Pincus Winston a long time ago, in this perfectly symmetrical system, the ability to comprehend God in an even greater essence is severely limited, because your ability to almost like an infant that has almost like everything in its environment is an extension of self. There's really, it's a theory, like, infants kind of, they don't necessarily have that sense of separation from everything around them. And this idea is like Adam and Eve live in this balanced state where did they begin and God, where did they end and God began, was something that wasn't clear to them. And so their ability to comprehend what it means to be without Hashem, to know reality, to know what evil is, like to truly comprehend evil was beyond their ability beyond their consciousness, because they had this unity, in a level of attachment to God that, we can't comprehend. But that also meant that now we can comprehend what it means to be apart from God. We can understand what it means to be far from God, to live in a world where, we have to be ruled by intermediaries and systems that keep us away from our very creator, and in a reality where God doesn't necessarily play a preeminent role or manifest himself here. So we know what it's like to be separated from God.
Yeah.
And that reality is a pretty frightening one. So it gives you appreciation of that attachment and being able to cleave to God again in the future. It gives you, it becomes the best, the greatest good possible, because you understand what the possibility is if that's not the reality.
That's awesome. Any other thoughts, or I'll keep reading? I'll keep reading.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Eric. Go for it.
Hello?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, I can. Can you guys?
Yep.
Hello? Okay, good. Okay. Okay. In the road cover for Shabbat, very interesting baraka, Akinu Sedata. And I'll just, and then the feds did. Okay, so it says, prepare the feast of perfect faith, the joy of the feast of the king. This is the feast, Kapukim, Kadishin, and the Zeranpim, and Isha. Come to partake of the feast, praise the name of God, and exalt him with thanksgiving. Adonai is my strength, my shield. Did my heart trust, no help, my heart exalted, and thank you. Okay, so in the footnote here it says, this paragraph, which is recited before each of the 3 Shabbat meals, is based on the passage of the Holy Zohar, verbatim in the Shara Kavunot. The 3 Shabbat meals core manifestations of the Shekinah, God's divine presence. Hakal Kapukim Kadishin, literally the field of holy apples, corresponds to the first Shabbat meal. Atika Kadisha, literally the whole, and of course the ancient one would be and being literally the small faith corresponds to the third Shabbat meal. Okay, and so it's right there. This prayer is connecting the 3 Shabbat meals, what appears to be by the Shabbat Queen, or to the Shabbat Queen, from Zeranpim to the Atika, that was the last week or so, that it does relate to the Ezekiel. And so I guess I'm just throwing you out there. This is something I've just been starting to dwell on a little bit.
What page in your Siddur is that on, Eric? I remember that, but I can never find it when I want to find it. I always just end up when I'm reading through it on the prayers.
The first occurrence. Yeah, the first is 48.
148. Yeah, I was, when I'm reading through it, I'm always like, I want to look into that, and then I always forget what page it was on.
And it was interesting then that there's actually the footnote.
Yeah. You're cutting up a little bit on my end. Maybe try turning off your camera. Might free up some bandwidth on your end. I'm going to read it real quick just in case it didn't come through super clear for other folks. It says, prepare the feast of perfect faith, the joy of the Holy King. Yeah, maybe try turn your camera off and see if that helps with the audio. I'm just going to reread it again just in case it didn't come through super clear for other folks. It says, and this is the Atkinu Seudata.
Camera on? I'm trying to turn it off.
You're off now. So you can still hear you, but can't see you now. So that's good.
My device is saying the camera is off.
It's off now. So the prayer says, and it's a short one. It says, "Prepare the feast of perfect faith, the joy of the Holy King. Prepare the feast of the King. This is the feast of the Hakal Tapuchin Kadishin, and the Zeranpin and the Atika Kadisha. Come to partake in the feast with him. I shall praise the name of God with song and exalt him with thanksgiving. Adonai is my strength and my shield. In him did my heart trust, and I was helped as a result. My heart exulted, and therefore with my song I shall thank him." And the notes says, okay, this is insight entitled Atkinu. Okay, Atkinu Seudata. This is this paragraph, which is recited before each of the three Shabbat meals, based on
49.
a passage in the Holy Zohar, and appears verbatim in the Sha'ar HaKavanot. The Zohar states that the three Shabbat meals correspond to the three manifestations of the Shekhinah, God's divine presence. Hachal Tapuchin Kadishin, literally the field of holy apples, corresponds to the first Shabbat meal, Friday night. Atika Kadisha, literally the holy ancient one, corresponds to the second Shabbat meal. And then Zeranpin, literally a small face, corresponds to the third Shabbat meal. Interesting. I have a Siddur from Hasidut that focuses has a lot more commentary. I'm gonna have to go find that and read and see what they have to say about that.
Well, one of the idea of the Olam Haba Shabbat is this idea that there's a unification, there's a Yechud that comes back at the end, where everything becomes back to its perfect unity. And so there's a lot of the forbidden activities on Shabbat. The restrictions are based on this idea of, not existing in the world of separation and distinction. So, you can't sort, you can't destroy, a lot of the prohibitions are based upon this idea of manifesting, a sense of division or separateness. You can't select and sort. So the idea that's based on this idea of this is a world of perfect unity, and on Shabbat we're to manifest that unity by directing our kavana of our prayers to unifying, going back to this, this perfectly symmetrical, balanced, unified existence. And yeah, it's in this like that prayer is like this perfect example of this kavana, this intent of manifesting this reality. So
yeah, there's well, and then you think of the fact that if Adam and Chava had made it to Shabbat, right, without eating of the tree, then they would have brought down holiness, and the process would have been completed. So there's that whole concept, idea of like the Shabbat really does. That there's a significance to Shabbat that's just incredibly deep that I think we're only scratching the surface on in this world in understanding. And then the idea that we have an additional soul, or that there's an additional soul for Shabbat. Anyways,
that is that's actually explained. To discuss a little bit in the for the end of Shabbat and the fourth Shabbat.
Yeah.
The additional soul.
It's going to take me a while to find that commentary on this one. I was just looking right now to see if I could find it quickly in
But here's my question, Chef. I like talking about levels of like Abhideva, so in the sense, what sense? And so,
sorry, I'm missing what you're saying there, Eric.
Neil was kind of making this progressive connection. Really? Are we working or?
Eric, unfortunately, it's coming through really in patches right now.
Okay. How? Anything? I have a terrible mic.
That might be better. Try it again.
That's better.
And maybe try it without the mic and just the phone.
Can you hear me now?
So far, so good. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Oh, we lost him. Oh well. Well, when Eric gets back on, we'll try. We'll see what he has if we can get that question. I'll keep reading in the meantime. So, third paragraph on 104. Whereas Abba and Ima are the masculine and feminine forces of creation, the information and the logic with which God created the universe, Zer Anpin and Nukpa, are the masculine and feminine forces of providence, or of God's presence in the world. We want providence in everything that happens in the world to fulfill the purpose of creation as precisely as possible. This essentially means that we are trying to fulfill God's purpose in creation through the forces of providence, which involve not only God's actions towards us, but his reactions to what we do. That's key right there, his reactions to what we do. It's like that's baked into the math or the equation, if you will, is not just us doing whatever, but the fact that the basic setup is that God would react to us. Eric, let's try it again.
Yeah, just a minute. Well, just hold on.
Alrighty. I'm just finishing up. I just read through the third paragraph. I want to read the fourth real quick, and then ask away after that. It says, when this purpose is fulfilled through man, the ultimate feminine aspect, Malkut, becomes the crown of her husband. This means that the entire development from unity of male and female to complete separation was in order to bring the world to its goal through awakening from below. Man only becomes the crown of creation when he is able to experience the greatest closeness to God through his own efforts. There it is right there, his own efforts. We need to have, yep. Yeah, Eric, you want to try and ask that question again, or pose that thought?
You hear? Am I coming through okay?
Try and give it a shot, because it's hard to tell in the brief bursts.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I think it's just my connection.
The audio is better right now for sure. So.
Oh, okay. So I'm just headsets. So okay, so as you know, what you were
talking about Lima being sort of an on-off switch in terms of flow of energies are being of you down through to a reality that we can objectively relate to. With this, in terms of, in a sense, like connecting the circuit, that circuit, and the connectivity. Like, am I understanding it correctly? Infer that we're basically speaking of nukva. We're speaking of that connectivity that happens at this lower level.
Did you catch everything? You broke up a little bit. I think I kind of get it. I didn't know if Seth had heard a little bit more.
You know what? Let's just move on. I'm
well. Now you're perfect.
well enough to make this happen. So I'll just listen.
I'm sorry about your internet speed. Because this was always, I've been trying to understand the section a lot better and understand, like, what is this coming from and what does this mean? And it was
unreal.
And if I can find it here. So I guess when you take these different in the Yedid Nefesh, I think I've talked about the book a bit. It's by Rabbi Yechiel Bar-Lev. So he talks about this idea of the all of these Sephardic influences are included in all the others. It's just which one is taking preeminence and which ones. It's like DNA. Some switched on, some are switched off. So they're all present, but not all of them are active forces. Not all of them are actually restricted forces. Some of them are just not They're there. They're present, but they're not detract. They're not adding, and they're not taking away. And so their influence is kind of shut down. And so when you get to this idea of these Partsufim, or these active forces, whether, whether you call it Nukva or other realities, it's these Sephiroth are manifesting as preeminent in this reality. And so some of them are creating the practical realities of this idea of divine providence. So there are Sephardic forces or names of God that encode for mercy, and that encode for suffering, that encode for forgiveness or teshuvah or tikkun. All of these different concepts emanate from these spiritual realities, but ultimately are connected to the Sephardic influences that create these possibilities, these opening these channels of data and connectivity to come through. In the modern world, it's really easy to understand with the idea of computer networking and and seeing the pain of like an internet connection that is painfully slow. There's still a connection there, but the idea is that in regards to our channels of connectivity to God, some of them are in a high-speed internet, some of them are 1997 300 baud dial-up modem speed. And so these realities, these connectivities, which we call teshuvah, prayer, prophecy, forgiveness, mercy, love, anger, judgment, justice, all of these realities that manifest in our lives through specific events and different circumstances, ultimately have their connection and their origin in these Sephardic influences. And so, they're under it's like an organizational chart of who's controlling what and where and why. And so it's like one of the things that the Ramchal states in Direct Hashem is it's, the spiritual world is set up like an army, like in organized, there's generals, and then there's you have generals and corporals. You have the higher ranking who are responsible for those. And getting into the Parsha this week, you can see like the idea of, Moshe not being directly responsible for it, like creating a division, creating an authority structure. But the spiritual realms are organized in the same way. There are angelic forces that are birthed in a way from these Sephirotic influences. So they are connected, and their preeminent manifestation and role is to create these realities of forgiveness or repentance or suffering or repair, all of these different spiritual realities in our life in the physical world. And so when you talk about the Partsufim, it's just what are the supernal, what are these high forces, Sephirotic influences that are preeminent in the manifestation of these different events, whether they're these constructs that we were talking about in the ideas of divine providence, or it's into our very situation, like why is my check engine light on? Is it something I did? Is it something that I need to do? Is it have absolutely no connection to me directly? Like why is XYZ occurring in my life? And ultimately, if you believe that everything that emanates in this world is manifested from a spiritual reality, then ultimately there's going to be a spiritual influence and force that's controlling that circumstance or that event. And so, and all of these events can be categorized under the general broad categories of acts of restriction or judgment, acts of loving kindness or expansion, and then a balance of the two, like a buffer. And when you talk about the systems of divine providence, it's this idea of the individual now is interacting with the system, and the system has a general purpose. We know that the overarching principle is chesed, love. So if your action would cause you to be annihilated, then another reality, another part of the system has to take place, because that would negate the entire goal of the system. So you have this alternate reality that intervenes on behalf of the individual who may need to, suffer divine judgment, but this hanhaga, or this characteristic or reality of mercy, takes preeminence, because we also know that chesed, loving kindness, is the trump card in the system. Therefore, instead of the person being annihilated, there are other routes to satisfy the element of justice. So when you interact with the system in a practical way, the practical application of interacting with these spiritual forces without being annihilated by them is what you call divine providence. And so these persona of like Zeram, Pen, and Nukva, they take an active role in creating and carrying out the ultimate directive of this entire purpose of creation, which is for God's ultimate good to be bestowed upon mankind to become the beneficiary, and everything to return to a unified state. And that leads to the very, the manifestation of that is Malkut, is that manifested here in this world, becoming an actual reality. These spiritual constructs and concepts being filtered through the spiritual realms, the angelic realms, these forces, into a physical reality that manifests in our own personal lives, but also throughout history. And so that's something like I've been very fortunate with the book to kind of understand these concepts and ideas a little bit better. And I think it's just trying to take all of these different ideas and manifestations of God in creation throughout Tanakh, and try and give them a sense of order and I hate to use the word personification, but give them an ability where we can approach God, to take away some of the mystery, to have like personalize the system so you can interact with the system. So I'm sorry, I went off a little bit there, but and my puppy's a little bit.
I mean, the whole idea is how can we, as as finite beings who have boundary and shape, connect to something that has no boundary and shape and actually is all things as well at the same time.
So as you as you go from this to when you go from these very, and when I use the word like high, or these levels of connectivity that transcend our ability to consciously comprehend, down to the attributes and understanding of God that we can actually comprehend. It's manifested in very different ways. And so that's really like you have the separation in the heavenly realms. It's like it's areas of conscious connection to God that most of us aren't able to attach to and comprehend. So, like you said, there's these levels that we can. There are realities of understanding God and ways and systems to understand God that we can attach to, that we can relate to. And so when you get to these Partsufim, these are the relatable aspects of God within creation. The taking on the clothing of a son or a daughter or a bride, or, to create these realities of connectivity and the possibility of understanding, like you said, an incomprehensible God. And so the Partsufim are the restriction of God in this world so we can have an understanding and a relationship with God. And it's really, it can be like all the terminology can be pretty dizzying at times, and trying like, okay, what does this mean again? And how does that relate to that?
And it starts to make sense in the sense that when you consider the fact that at no point will any of us in this life probably attain ultimate knowledge of, who God is, right? Because, I mean, which is just, unless if it happens, I mean, that's miraculous. I don't know how that would ever happen. But we can, each and every day, continually improve on our knowledge and our connection and our way to interact with and relate to Hashem. And I like how Rabbi Kessin puts it, is that the level of revelation that you attain in this life of Hashem is basically like, that's like your reward in Olam Haba, because that revelation that you're getting here and now, you're getting it. It's getting back to this last paragraph. It says, through his own efforts, right? The man only becomes the crown of creation when he is able to experience the greatest closeness to God through his own efforts. So the level of closeness to Hashem that we attain in this life through our own efforts is the reward that we get in Olam Haba, in the world to come. And so it's like the work is the reward, and it's so hard, it's so easy to miss that here with all of the challenges and the frustrations that we have, and not quite grasp that. But every moment and every day that I put into elevating and increasing my connection and my devakut to Hashem, whether that's through a hitbodedut, which would be like personal prayer and just more of a emotional connection, or whether that's through study and something like what we're doing right now. That level of revelation that I attain there is something I get to take with me into Olam Haba, and it's something that I couldn't have had in Olam Haba in the way that I will have it, because it's not just something that's freely given now; it's something that's earned, and that portion, or the revelation that I have with Hashem will be not have the bread of shame attached to it. I won't be dealing with that feeling that I'm receiving it as a beggar, as a free gift. No, this is something that I've attained on my own effort. So, anyway,
I like that analogy. One of the most intriguing things that Rabbi Bar Zadok said at one point was he kind of mirrors Kessin, but in his only unique way. Is the idea of these attaining levels of consciousness and connectivity, and it's almost like being, you're going, having, like you said, the ability to withstand this level of conscious connectivity to God without being annihilated, because you're at a level of, without being annihilated by the presence of God. So like you said, it's like preparing yourself so this whatever the concept of the bread of shame means in the spiritual realm doesn't become the mechanism that destroys you. Yeah.
I wonder if that bread of shame that you're bringing up right there is what happened with Nadav and Abihu, right? With their getting nullified, if you will, however you want to call it. It seems like what happened to them wasn't a punishment as it was just a nullification because of drawing near. And like they hadn't gone through the proper channels or steps, if you will, to be able to walk into that place and not be nullified. Anyways.
Yeah, like you said, the danger, and you know, if you look at the, you know, the Mishkan at that point being like a living example of how the spiritual realms are arranged, then that would be a great example of the importance of proper attachment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah,
well, I've always read that verse and I thought, like, it's got to be more than just punishment. There's something more here, and I've read a lot of different commentary on it, but you know, the thing that makes the most sense to me as I keep going around it is this idea of, you know, it wasn't a bad thing that happened to them. It just wasn't. It was, in a sense that, you know, you're being punished, but that rather they ascended beyond their pay grade at that point in time.
Yeah.
And they just weren't able to. They didn't have the capacity for it. And we would like to look at them on them critically. Yet, I mean, how many of us would have been nullified to just as quickly?
I think I might have been taken out of even before I got to that level.
Yeah, maybe at the brass labor, or, you know, even just out on like the front of the, not even getting it out of court. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go through the next section, which is the Torah. It's only a couple paragraphs, and then I think I may have found a way to utilize Hangouts with our phones. So I might be able to actually next week for Eric give him a phone call on his phone rather than use his data network, and maybe that'll work. So we'll just go through this next section and then we'll call it a night. The Torah. Zeir Anpin has many manifestations. For instance, it is seen as the personification of the written Torah with its 613 commandments. Interesting. Okay. I'm going to take a little, you know, old, put on my old Christian hat, if you will, and how, you know, there's a whole debate on whether Jesus is God or not, and all of these things. And you look at John chapter 1, where it talks about in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. And we're saying right here, Zeir Anpin, which is obviously the Son, right? It has many manifestations. For instance, it has been seen as the personification of the written Torah with its 613 commandments. So, you know, John being the good Kabbalist, if you will, or you know, Maaseh Merkavos that he was, you know, is probably connecting to this concept. So we might be have one of the earliest written down examples of the Maaseh Merkava, you know, concepts, or these, you know, the Zeir Anpin, if you will. And there, anyways, tangent over. Just like a human being has 248 limbs and 365 nerves and veins, the Torah has 248 positive and 365 negative commandments, or mitzvot. Torah itself is thus also a complete parsuf, and like Zeir Anpin, constitutes the primary vehicle through which God and man interact. Essentially, the way we identify with God and fulfill his will is through the Torah. Furthermore, every time we perform one of the commandments, there is a corresponding manifestation in Zeir Anpin, which in turn changes the way Hashgacha, providence, is going to work. In other words, the performance of the commandment actually affects the way the divine program will be executed. Hence, even though God's will and his wisdom are revealed to some extent in the Torah itself corresponds to the level of Zeir Anpin. Referring to the Parsuf Nukva, the Tikkuni Zohar states, Malkut is the mouth. It is therefore called the Torah of the mouth, the oral Torah. Thus, while God's will is manifest through Zeir Anpin, which parallels the written Torah, the only way we understand what the Torah is really saying to us is through the accompanying set of oral instructions. This is the meaning of the Talmudic statement that without an oral Torah, we would be unable to read the Torah or know what its words mean. There's a lot packed in there, man. Um, so what he's saying here, and I'm more kind of like processing this out verbally than anything. I'm not trying to make any declarative statements. Is that we've got Zerampin, which is the son, right, and Nukva, which is the daughter. Nukva also connects to Malkut. Zerampin is above, Nukva is below, and Nukva is kind of like where, you know, everything, like the goal of creation, if you will, is looking towards and working down towards bringing Hashem down to this level in Nukva. And Zerampin is the 613 commandments. It's written, and when we perform them, then we, it says there's a corresponding manifestation in Zerampin, which in turn changes the way providence is going to work. In other words, the performance of a commandment actually affects the way the divine program will be executed. Hence, even though God's will and his wisdom are revealed to some extent in the Torah itself corresponds to the level of Zerampin. But Nukva, which is the daughter, is Malkut, the mouth, which is also oral Torah. And that Nukva, if you will, is, so we've got, it's almost like we've got this Torah on this level that is still unattainable, right? It's even though it's written down, and this is the problem that so many people in like Hebrew roots and even the Messianic side, and just in general, like a lot of people get caught up in, is they try to, without an oral Torah, that oral Torah, they approach it. They just kind of create their own inner oral Torah for how they read the words, and it becomes like it's almost like they don't have the. This is probably too simple a term, but it's almost like they don't have the what's the word I'm looking for? The decoder ring for the Torah, and so the Torah is still unattainable. But at the level of the feminine side, which is Nukva, which is the oral Torah, which is like the lowest point. It's where everything's kind of going. That's where the rubber meets the road, if you will, especially when you get to the mitzvot. Because how do you celebrate Shabbat, or how do you do whatever mitzvah? There's still a lot of questions and a lot of wiggle room and a lot of vagueness there, and so it's almost like we're getting down to that ground level, that Malkut level, and without the oral Torah, Malkut can't really be expressed. It's impossible to express Malkut without Malkut. I don't know if anything I made sense right there. I'm more or less kind of like talking through thoughts. It may have just been a complete confusing statement. So
I appreciate you talking out. Like this was oh yeah, go ahead. Sound good.
Do I? Okay.
Let's try it.
Well, I kind of, my just a quick principles of cause and effect.
Doing it again, Aaron. It's doing it again. I'm gonna have to figure out how to get it to call your phone.
Some of those next week.
Yeah, we'll try it next week, and maybe next week we'll kind of start off on that, because this is interesting. I want to hear the thoughts, because this is good.
I know it's a cliffhanger right now.
Yeah, tune in next week.
Like, come on,
tune in next week. Yeah.
One of the things that helped me a lot is again, Yedid Nefesh is a commentary on a commentary of Rabbi the Ramchal, and he's got, and Toby says there's another commentary on that, but he talks about this idea. So when I first encountered these ideas, I got so lost. And then when you get to this idea of Arik Ampin, I'm sorry, Zerampin, you get the beard. Like, what? Mm-hmm. There's a beard? Okay.
Yeah.
What?
13,
he's got 13. It's like a pretty, he can't grow a beard apparently, but I'm sorry. All irreverence aside, the idea is like, I got completely lost at this idea. And then again, Yedid Nefesh has really helped me come together. So he talks about this idea that the overriding system is Keter, the overriding, the one that has absolutely the trump card. Well, the trump card in the system of divine providence is Chesed, or love. The actual trump card in the entire system is Yichud, unity. So everything is for the sake of the unity of God. And
Mhm.
that is like, you get this construct a lot more explicitly in some of the Ramchal's writings, like Da'at Tavanot and Meshalat Isharim. So, but so he says that in this idea of this entire system, Keter, the crown, the will of God, the divine will of God is Yehud, is this idea is everything is for the sake of oneness, the God's unity. And so when this the overarching view of the entire system sees that mankind, I can read it a little bit from Yedid
Yeah,
Nefesh,
yeah.
if you don't mind.
Yeah,
So
go
he
for it.
says, we see that the principal function of the Partsuf of Zer Anpin is the guiding power of Mishpat, which is, I'm trying to think like a great, it's not like absolute justice, but it's like, yeah, I have to look up a better translation of Mishpat. Thus, the guiding power were transmitted only to the Partsuf of Zer Anpin, it would be confronted with a difficult condition. This is because if we judged human beings only as they were, they might be deserving of destruction. Then the purpose of creation would not be fulfilled. In the Midrash, we find that the Holy One built worlds and destroyed them because they could not exist under the rules of din, or strict judgment. In order that the purpose of creation be fulfilled, the Holy One wanted to bring forth a higher form of the guiding power, and that was the guiding power of Yehud, unity. Simply stated, the guiding power of Yehud is the type of intercession from above in order to change the guiding power of Mishpat. So if you're thinking of the Sephardic tree, Keter is like the trump card of that entire middle pillar. So it looks down and it says, oh, we're not going to let things get destroyed. We have to keep, the ultimate goal is for this manifestation of God's presence in the world, so his oneness can be explicitly manifested out of creation. And so for that to happen, this the mishpat, this lower level of justice, it's not like the strict level of divine justice, it's black and white, it's a little bit different connotation. For creation to continue and the system to keep flowing down all the way to Malkut, there has to be something that's going to bring that connectivity back. And so this reality, he says, let's see. So the reality is to direct this guiding power. Let me see if I'll read a little bit. The guiding power does not have an independent purpose. Rather, it is a means of fulfilling the final purpose. The origin of this intercession is in the parts of Atik. And it emerges. So the intervening force, like the intermediary between this Yehud, the Keter, and Mishpat, is this construct of Atik, and its manifestation is through the Dikna, which is the beard of Zer Anpin, which is manifested in our physical world as the spiritual concepts of the 13 attributes of mercy. And so you get to this idea of like one of the most powerful forces, the most important triad in this entire system for humanity to continue on in its fallen, degraded state, is this triad of Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. That is like the intercession. That is like the intermediary, the intercessory aspect of these of the Sephirot to keep mankind from ultimately being destroyed. And it's the I can't even think of a really good idea, but the manifestation of this construct is, the revelation of the 13 attributes of mercy to Moshe. And one of the really great commentaries on that is the Tomer Devorah, the Palm Tree of Deborah, by it's Radak, what's his Cordovero, by Moses Cordovero, talking about what is these 13 attributes of mercy mean. And if you look at it, it's just really like an overview of all the systems of Hashgacha Prati, which is the divine providence. It's talking about his long patience, his long suffering, his loving kindness. He gives us an opportunity for tikkun, to repair the damage we've done, to repent and turn away from our sins, to sustains our takes upon himself Hashem takes upon himself in this system some of the sustains the attributes of justice so we can have a chance to repent. And so if you look at his Tomer Devorah, it's like this beautiful expansion on the ideas of these 13 attributes of mercy, which, because the whole system of divine providence is based on rachamim, mercy, then you can see how these are manifested in these spiritual constructs that we have, like in the system, to give us a chance to repent, to give us a chance to undo the damage we've done, to all these things, to suffer instead of being annihilated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, like it didn't make sense to me. Like there's some young guy with 13 hair beard up there, and that was a little bit more approachable and understandable for me after reading that commentary. And so again, it's just a way of trying to give like a visualization, a construct, an organization to this entire system, to make it a system that we can comprehend.
Yeah. Well, the thing that you're reminding me, because you're talking about mishpat, but you're saying it's not absolute mishpat, if you will, or but it's got like this weakness to it. That's not a really perfect term.
Yeah, no,
it.
But like it's like a weakened form of absolute, black and white.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
Well, it reminds me, there's a verse, and it's coming up here soon in one of the parshas about Aaron, and how Aaron was able to bring peace between the people in Israel. And the idea, and I'm pulling this up from my memory banks now, so it's going to be a really, really poor paraphrase. But the basic idea is that Moses was able to make judgments at a much higher level of revelation, at a level of revelation to where absolute knowledge of the situation was there. And so two people would come before him with a dispute, and he'd say, "You're right, you're wrong." Right? It would just be black and white. There was no ability or capacity for compromise. But Aaron and also the other elders beneath them, because their prophecy was at a much lower level, they didn't have the capacity like Moses to see straight to the heart of a matter and be able to judge, black and white in any situation. And so because they actually had less, their judgment was less pure in the sense, was less there was a hester, right? Because there was a covering or a concealment around their prophecy. They weren't able to perceive the all of the details of the situation, all the nuance, and make a complete judgment. So because of that, that opened the door for the two people that are coming to them, even though at the level of Moses, one was right and one was wrong, clearly. Aaron, though, when he was the one judging, or the other elders, because of his limitation, so to speak, his mishpat was actually able to bring peace between the two. Because under Moses, one person was happy, one person wasn't, right? And so it didn't bring peace necessarily. It may have brought justice, but it didn't bring peace and unity between the two people. But under Aaron and under the other elders, they were able to bring peace because they were able to bring compromise instead of saying, "Okay, you're right and you're wrong," and rather they brought equity between the two, where both parties felt like they left having been heard and having been honored and respected. And so instead of one leaving happy and one leaving angry and there being a rift, they both left, as brothers or friends, or as related. And that was all due to the fact that the judge's ability to make judgments was limited compared to Moses's. So it just seems like it's kind of, that's the way that I relate to everything that you just said right there, and then understanding how that mishpat at this level that we're talking about could actually bring unity because of, but it's specifically because of the weakness, if you will, or the defect, if you will, in that mishpat, that peace and unity can happen.
Yeah, that ability to compromise and bring balance.
Yeah,
because like when you're looking at these different triads and how they're grouped in the Sephardic tree, according to the understanding of the Arizal and Ramchal, is that, when you get to the level of Chokmah and Binah, they have they share attributes of the other, so they're perfectly symmetrical. They're not opposing forces. They're like a loop. They're like the infinity sign. That's how I imagine it. But when you get down to Chesed and Gevurah, the definition is Chesed. That's the one and the zero. It's like Chesed is not Gevurah and Gevurah is not Chesed. They're defined by what their exclusion, by their oppositional qualities. And then you get down. The same is true with Netzach and Hod, but they have they're more balanced than the zero and the one of Chesed and Gevurah. That where Netzach, one contains attributes of mercy. So the expansive side actually contains attributes of what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. The restrictive aspects. So they're kind of like they mirror Chokmah and Bina closer than Chesed and Gevurah, where like Chokmah has elements of like wisdom has elements of Bina in that it has restrictive aspects, and Bina has the expansive aspects that match like a mirror of Chokmah. Netzach and Hod have the same capacity, not in this perfectly symmetrical unit, like you said. They one has to take information from the other and then feed it back. And so, but they like one is leaning, their attributes of mercy in the more, restrictive side, and their attributes of restriction in the merciful side, in the expansive side. So you can see that Moshe at times has more restrictive components to his interaction with Bnei Israel than Aaron does. Like you said, Aaron brings peace. He makes everybody happy. Moses ticks them off. But you would think that Moshe would be the restrictive aspect in that one, but he's not. He's in the expansive side.
Right.
And so because of that, they mirror the mother and the father above in their relationship to each other more closely than Chesed and Gevurah. So their ability to interact with they're mirror images of the father and the mother, but their ability to bring, like you said, to bring equanimity and peace to and balance back to the system, and to be the final mitigating force so everything isn't destroyed, is what because they share aspects of the other that makes them the perfect pair to bring harmony back into this system. And so the beard, I'm sorry.
No, can you explain to me like the 13, what do you call it, like strands of the beard? Because I've looked at
that. He calls it. So I can go a little bit here. He says here, the divine will is revealed by the illumination which it sends. When a decision exists regarding the interference of a higher Partsuf, or a guiding power from above, then the root of the decision comes from, I can't give that term. So it says, apparently an illumination or divine will comes from the place, and this illumination is diffused in channels. So it's talking about a tikyomim, filtered down through Arik Anpin. So it's talking about filtering through the various Partsufim down to Zeir Anpin. And so he says here, it's diffused in channels. That is a series of unfoldings, just as the beard emerges from the face. The Ari uses dinkna, or beard, to teach the subject of the diffusion of the divine will. So we know he's saying that when there's an intervention in the system, that through the attribute of judgment and din in the lower levels, mishpat, then a person would be deserving of judgment. But this is the channels through which God intervenes in creation. He says this type of illumination of the Dikna is from the high levels of the guiding power all the way from Keter. Later, we will explain the function of the illumination of the beard. It is a function of the Partsuf Arik Anpin to direct the guiding power of Zeir Anpin and to prepare it for achieving the ultimate goal, which is Yehud. Sometimes the function of Arik Anpin is to mitigate the judgments of Zeir Anpin, and sometimes its function is to nullify them. The matter of mitigating judgments is widely used concept in Kabbalah and in Chassidut. The function of the Tzaddik, the righteous man, is to mitigate the judgments when ordinary human beings have not succeeded in doing so by serving their Creator. Mitigation of dinim, or judgment, indicates the dominance of chesed. The mitigation of dinim does not lead to their disappearance. In spite of this, sometimes the partsuf arik anpin does function to remove the judgment completely. The difference depends upon the degree of the revelation of illumination that are put out by arik anpin. In the Kabbalistic literature, and especially in the Idra Zuta, we find that the lights of the Arik Anpin emerge in different qualities and quantities. This is the matter of the repairs or restoration of harmony referred to below. And so he says one of the 13 repairs of the will of wills is that it is an uncovered illumination. When an illumination like this emerges, the judgments are completely removed and not just mitigated. This illumination comes from the highest part of the Partsuf of Arik Anpin, all the way from Chokmah, Bina, and Da'at. When the illuminations come from a lower place, like Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet, or Netzach, Hod, Yesod, there is not enough force in these illuminations to remove the dinim, only mitigate them, only like push them aside. We can ask what determines whether the illumination will emerge from Chokmah, Bina, Da'at, or from Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, and Netzach, Hod, Yesod. This depends on the condition of the world. A world in Kabbalistic language means a complete unit of guiding power. The absolute source of guiding power is this preeminent triad of Keter. There are definite levels of activities and infinite types of realities around us, and each one of them has a divine root which enables it to exist. This is the essence of Hanhaga, or the guiding powers to produce these divine roots. So one of the things he says is it's not just a static system. It's not just God sending his illumination to us. It's a feedback loop. So it's what man is putting into the system. And so there's a construct in this whole system is that that man through his actions can either open these channels or close these channels, both personally and as corporately. Like Bnei Israel can, have the divine, the Or Ein Sof, be filtered through these various aspects and open these channels so more, your internet connection's high speed and you have a pretty clear, you can hear everything that's being said in clarity. Or through their actions, they can close these gates, destroy these channels, and this divine flow will be either diminished greatly or completely cut off. And there's an idea that and he really brings it out clear in a later part of the book, is that it comes through in the construct of prophecy and the level of prophecy, that Moshe attained a level of prophecy, but that gate was closed off when he was the last one to obtain that level of prophecy because Israel faltered at Mount Sinai. And so all the prophets that come after him will never be able to obtain that level of illumination as Moshe, because that gate is no longer accessible because of the condition of mankind's consciousness has been polluted and tainted, and that channel cut off completely. So you have some prophets that come about, after Moshe that see at a very, their ability to perceive the message that God sends is pretty clear, like Yeshaya, like Isaiah. But you see that his level of prophecy is not obtainable by later generations. That it's not that they didn't get to the same level, it's just the clarity. And this is why I was looking at Abraham Abulafia. He's really focused on this idea of the Ishkla Ariya, which is talked about a bit in the in a little bit further ahead in inner space. This idea of the lens through which you perceive God, that you can't see God directly. Therefore, there's some kind of a filtering system. Like when you go to your eyes checked at the optometrist, does this one look clear? This one. The idea is that most of us can't see anything. Our ability to perceive God is murky at best. And as you obtain levels of consciousness and rectification of your soul, then you get to see through a clear glass till you're actually looking at, a very clear reflection of God in the system. And so this idea is that these levels of consciousness and ability to perceive God, this ability to do this comes from this what's the word I'm looking for? He almost uses the combined two systems that aren't exactly the same, but that these triads are the levels at which this clarity is filtered through. So when you're interacting with the system, if like they're still getting prophecy from God, but their perception and their imagery is has been it's a much distant, it's distance further away, it's less clear, it's less identifiable. It's like losing your glasses when when you need to see it, and everything now becomes blurry. You can tell it's a tree, but your perception of the minute details of what that tree is now it's just a great big green blob, And so the idea is that they're still getting this light. It's just their filter, their lens is been clouded, and there's less clarity in the vision. And so part of that is because the people that are receiving the message aren't worthy of obtaining such a clear revelation of God. And part of it is the contamination of the world really distorts the message as well. And it's the distortion of the message is because these triads aren't ultimately it seems like they're, the system is designed to, Tikkun didn't happen at this level when man was interacting with this really high level of the system, that first triad. Tikkun didn't come at that second higher level. And, when we see when it gets down to this triad of Netzach, Hod, Yesod, that it doesn't get, rectification doesn't take place at that level as well. And then it gets down to the fail-safe in the system, which brings you back ultimately to the ultimate trump card, the ultimate purpose. It's almost like the end is in the beginning. When the system, because of man's interaction, have polluted, I hate to say it, it's almost like the imagery you get in the wording is, it's like you really like anger that attribute. So now instead of being an ally, it becomes an enemy working against you. If that makes any sense. Because of man's interaction, there's only so much damage that the system will allow before it reaches a tipping point. And so the last fail-safe in the system is Malkut, Yesod, and then to Malkut. And when you hit that lower, that final bottom, the system will not allow damage to go to the extent where it destroys. It turns does damage to that last attribute, and therefore the idea is Keter, the one that has the ultimate, sees everything and perceives everything and is driving this entire system with this will that's almost unknowable, and the end is unknowable. It takes preeminence based on this idea of its interaction with Zeranpin, with this idea of this entity that's been created to be like this fail-safe in the system, which is ultimately the system will not, because the purpose is for God's oneness to be manifest in creation. Therefore, the system will not allow itself to be destroyed. Another mechanism will step in that trumps the entire system. So the idea is the connection between this idea of the son and this, even beyond the mother and father realm, is that, ultimately that, and I was often wondered, like, and it's something that Rabbi Kessin is starting to get into a little bit in some of his later teachings and commentaries on Derek Hashem, is like, what happens, because we know the system isn't going to work. So what are the mechanisms at the very end that make this ultimate goal of, one, the entire creation not being destroyed by the actions of man, but two, mankind being able to receive God's goodness when he's not able to rectify himself to the point where he becomes worthy of that good. So there has to be something in the system that affords man the opportunity to become a recipient of that good without having to be the 100% earner of that goodness that he receives. There has to be some kind of a zedek, or some kind of a mechanism in this system that even overrides the bread of shame concept. And if you listen to Rabbi Kessin's latest teaching, he's at number 90 now, you can hear him get into some of the mechanisms where, and this is where when you're reading in Yedid Nefesh, you're getting into the idea of the very mind of God, the Keter, Hokmah, Binah, this perfect unity, this perfect balance that is going to bring us to the goal of unity. And how we get there is going to be pretty atrocious if you look at some of the, the judgments that fall to bring about whole balance in the system. And that's the one aspect of all of this I've never really found explicitly taught. I can find a lot of information on, on divine providence and explicit teachings of how, suffering brings balance and a righteous individual bring balance, but not this, like, we know that ultimately when it gets down to the levels of Yesod and Malkut, that when that damage is done at that level, then the entire system, that entire attribute of justice, embodied in the Shekinah, in this divine manifestation of God in this world that goes out with, his people, actually turns against the people of, turns against Israel and becomes an enemy. And so there has to be some kind of mechanism that restores everything, like a reset button somewhere, not even like a Control-Alt-Delete, but a complete reset and reboot of the system. And that's what Kessen's starting to get into. And it's the first time I've ever heard that explicitly taught. I've seen it hinted at, but I've never seen it explicitly taught before.
Well, you got me to go back and listen to more of the most recent ones now. I'm in like,
it's absolutely 90. Just like, it blew my mind. And this is why I got, when I was listening to Rabbi Kessen teach, I started to do some research online, and that's when I got into Abu Lafia's teaching on like why what I'm saying isn't Christianity at all, and the idea of this Trinity and divinity of God, and how, it might seem, if you just do a cursory overview of some of the teachings, they might be similarities, but at the heart, they're very different concepts. But when you listen to it, if you don't understand, you can really, you can make the parallels the parallels are obvious. And the fact that people, when people are teaching this explicit, construct of how does a system come to the ultimate goal of God without, and overcome the problem of the bread of shame and man being unworthy of this good, then they have to kind of say, well, it sounds like Christianity, but it's not, and Abu Lafi had to do the same thing in his system as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense why he had such a hard time with so many other people, because he was, the Hasidut has had a lot of the same stuff thrown at them as well.
Yeah.
So interesting. I mean, I don't know how much you've listened to Ariel Cohen Oloro, but it's unfortunate because I know so many people on the Hebrew roots or Messianic side that'll take something that he says and run with it and say he believes in the Trinity, and it's like, well, if you listen to him, if you really understand him, he's not saying what you think he's saying at all. But he's speaking on a level that a lot of people just don't take the time to even grasp.
And I think that's why a lot of these teachings haven't been, made public, because. But I think that some teachers are getting to the point where they think enough knowledge is out there, enough material has been printed, and enough resources are there. When you make these, when you say these things that people can actually see, because it's taken Rabbi Kessen 89 other shiurim to get to the point where he can talk about this concept, because all of these ideas and constructs are so important to understand, how this, what he's saying and what the meanings are. And I always use this idea of, like, if you take like an evangelical Christian and a Mormon and you put them in a room and you talk about prayer and salvation, they may be using the same terminology, but I guarantee you that the concepts and the ideas and their thinking is vastly different, even though they might be using the same terms. So.
Very true. Well, this has been really good. Unfortunately, Eric wasn't able to chime in. Hopefully, it sounds like he was able to hear us, which is good. But between now and next week, I think I found a place online that suggests that we can actually In addition to calling computers through Google Hangouts, I can also call phone numbers. And so instead of using the data network, we can probably get him on the phone. So I'm going to try and see if I can start working. Because we miss hearing your
we miss Eric a lot.
You spin the conversation in good directions. So anywho, well, we will get back in next week, Lord willing, B'ezrat Hashem. We will continue on, and I'd like to go through again this section that we just read through, the one on the Torah, just because I feel like there's a lot of good stuff there. So we will see you guys later.